It is time. It is beyond time for the code of conduct to die. The mere idea of a code of conduct, every code of conduct, needs to get tossed into the trash bin pronto. The code of conduct as a concept has been weaponized to do more harm to a wider variety of software and hardware organizations, from small projects to major foundations, than any other single thing I can think of in recent history. Uncle Bob Martin, who many of you may know as a major proponent of agile programming, extreme programming, solid object-oriented programming. He's written a ton of books on C++ and clean code and UMO and UML and functional design and a bunch of other things. Uncle Bob Martin, he's a bit of a legend. He's been around for quite some time. Well, he hopped over on X the other day and posted the following, which got me thinking a little bit. I'm just going to read this to you now. Quote, "In my view, this whole cancel culture attitude entered our industry through the back door of the Code of Conduct movement. The COC, the Code of Conduct, was the Trojan horse. It gave petty little thought police the power they needed to ban and cancel people. I think we need to rethink the whole code of conduct thing." And I couldn't agree more with what he said. Hear, hear, Uncle Bob. This has been a constant and ongoing problem. Now, realistically, many people, many defendants and advocates for code of conduct will come out and say, "Oh, so you are against codes of conduct? That must mean you're against being nice to people. You must mean that you want to harass and hurt people because the codes of conduct just say that you can't be mean and you can't harass people. That's it. So if you're against the codes of conduct, you must be a mean person who wants to harass people." And that's insane. That is an absolutely insane thing, because the whole purpose here with the code of conduct is, more often than not, is they codify into a set of rules, often very vague and easily manipulated set of rules, things that we just were normally thinking about prior to it, right? Before the code of conduct, if someone was in an organization and started harassing and bullying everyone else, what happened? Well, that person got put on timeout or kicked out of the organization entirely. That's how it worked. That's how it's always worked in every organization since time began. When we added the official, codified, written down code of conduct, what it did is it added layers of bureaucracy where individuals who were given even small amounts of power in order to moderate, censor, or control other individuals could use that bureaucracy to their advantage and, in effect, weaponize a code of conduct in order to cause harm to others. Just to give you a few random examples, because there's so many of them, it's ridiculous. The Linux kernel bans individuals from contributing code to the Linux kernel because they didn't quite adhere to the code of conduct that was existing. Now, what's crazy here is they actually, in this particular case, this was from the Bcache FS developer, they actually modified the code of conduct in order to silence a developer. Right? So they literally were publicly weaponizing a code of conduct in order to harm an individual developer and in turn harm everyone that could use the Linux kernel, because we now have a Linux kernel that has less quality, less features, and less code in it. Or how about the Python developers? There was a Python major contributor, a contributor that had been around for 20 plus years, 30 years almost, who was given a timeout. This is a real thing that happened. Was given like a 3-month timeout because he stated somewhere that he thought that Saturday Night Live back in the 1970s was funny. So they gave him a timeout, and they used the code of conduct of the Python Foundation as a means to do that. Now, they weren't really giving him a timeout because he liked SNL. They were giving him a timeout because during that whole period of time, that same contributor who got put on timeout was mouthing off was disagreeing with what the activities of the Python board were doing, right? He didn't like what they were up to. And so in order to silence him, they concocted a strange cockamamie rule or interpretation of their code of conduct rules that made it so, oh, well, if you say you liked Saturday Night Live during the 70s, you have to go on timeout. That's what happened. It's crazy and it's stupid. And it's weaponizing the code of conduct. The same thing sort of happened here just these last couple of weeks when a C++ standards contributor, someone who had been contributing technical papers to the standards of C++, was given the boot for using the word question in the title of a technical paper. And that's going to make people sad or something like that. So given the boot. Again, no one is helped with this, other than people who don't want to be challenged, other than people who want to be able to have as much power as they want over an organization without someone else coming in and challenging them in some way. They got to give those people the boot. This is exactly what happened with NixOS. NixOS is a packaging system and a Linux distribution, right? NixOS, a few individuals that were given some moderation power over NixOS, they decided that they were going to have a purge. They literally called it a purge of Nazis from NixOS. Now, they weren't actually getting rid of actual Nazis. They were getting rid of people that they didn't like, that had the wrong politics from them, or that wanted to do different things with the NixOS Foundation than they wanted to do. So what did they do? They used the code of conduct to manipulate it, to try and find some sort of weird, wishy-washy, weaselly way to point at statements people have made and say, I feel that is violating the code of conduct, so now I can kick you out of the project forever, right? And they did this to a ton of people. In fact, they banned me from the NixOS project before I had any involvement in the NixOS project. They literally committed a purge of Lunduke based on the NixOS code of conduct when I wasn't even in there. I didn't have an account. I wasn't part of the project. I wasn't going to be part of the project. They just didn't like me, so they preemptively purged me, right? And this went so far that they forced the abdication of the guy that created NixOS itself. They wrote him an abdication letter, put it in front of him, and demanded that he sign it and leave. The individuals had... These code of conduct wielding individuals had managed to get themselves weaseled into enough of a position of power to almost utterly destroy this organization. And it's not the only one. This is been happening for years over at openSUSE. Many of you who watch and listen to and read the Lunduke Journal will know that at one point I was an elected board member of openSUSE, right? Of the openSUSE Linux project. Now, I'm not allowed around there anymore. In fact, anyone who is even remotely centrist or conservative is not allowed in openSUSE. The few remaining people who are centrist or conservative in the openSUSE project are only there because they've stayed really, really quiet, as in they don't post anything on a personal blog, on a social media account. They don't talk to a friend. They keep it secret. 100% secret, because the moment it becomes known, not that they shout their politics on a mailing list or something, just anyone even smells that you might be conservative or something, you're kicked out of the project. You are banned from the project. They give all sorts of people the boot from the project. I got a flood of emails of people who got kicked out of that project, banned from their mailing lists, banned from voting in their elections, all because of their politics. And they use the code of conduct in order to justify that, the openSUSE codes of conduct. Now, does the code of conduct say if you're a conservative, you have to be given the boot? No, but it says enough other things and has enough vague language in it that it can be easily weaponized to get rid of people that are deemed undesirables, right? And so that's what they do. And interestingly, they've been doing it so much that openSUSE is now a ghost town. They've got elections going on right now. They can't find enough people to even run for the openSUSE board now. It used to be that you'd have a good number of choices of different candidates with different backgrounds and engineering and marketing and whatnot to sit on the openSUSE board. That was years ago, though. They've kicked out so many people, and so many people are terrified of having any level of public involvement in openSUSE because of this weaponized code of conduct that they have 3 open slots, I believe, for their current election. They only have 1 person running. So we'll see how that works out for them. And then, of course, there's Godot. All of you may remember this. This was from just a month or 2 back. Godot, the open source game engine, which is a very cool project. I'm just going to say straight up, it's a cool project. They enacted a mass cleansing of non-woke supporters. Basically, they used their code of conduct, weaponized it, and sent one of their paid employees on a warpath of banning people across their community on their source repositories, in their forums, on their chat channels, their social media accounts, just blocked and banned all over the place. It happened in waves. And they labeled the people that they were banning the filth of humanity and toxic pieces of beep. And they used the code of conduct to justify it. Right? This is an ongoing, repeating pattern. If you look into any major Linux organization, you will quickly begin to find issues where they censor and ban people repeatedly because of their weaponized code of conduct, from Linux to the GNOME Foundation to Godot and on and on and on. Now, you might think, well, this is just because these are poorly written codes of conduct. That may be true. That may be true. However, the individuals that are weaponizing the codes of conduct are really working hard to twist language to find ways to weaponize it, right? And realistically, there's just not that much need for a code of conduct among people who are working on a software project. Now, there are, in my opinion, codes of conduct out there that are not horrible, right? So, like, for example, I wrote a code of conduct many years back when I was thinking, you know what, we just needed a good code of conduct. And my code of conduct was very simple. It was be excellent to each other. And that was it, right? That was the only line in my code of conduct. And so I put that out there. Now, do I think that's a good code of conduct? Well, by comparison, yeah. I also, there's certain ones out there like the Ladybird Code of Conduct. The Ladybird Code of Conduct is just a few bullet points that seem pretty reasonable. Participants will be tolerant of opposing views. Participants must ensure that their language and actions are free of personal attacks and disparaging personal remarks. When interpreting the words and actions of others, participants should always assume good intentions. Now, I like that, right? Those are reasonable things. Those are things that I personally agree with, right? And so when the Ladybird web browser project put out their code of conduct, I like that. The same is true with SQLite. Now, SQLite has a code of ethics. And it was, I'm going to read a little bit to you now because it's somewhat humorous. Quote, this document was originally called a code of conduct and was created for the purpose of filling in a box on supplier registration forms submitted to the SQLite developers by some clients. So basically they needed to have a code of conduct, so they created one. Okay, so let's look at the code of conduct. It has 60 plus items in it. Number 1, first of all, love the Lord God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole strength. Then love your neighbor as yourself. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not covet. Do not bear false witness. Honor all people. Like, it goes on like this, right? It has so many things in this. And you know what? I agree with a lot of them. And I love that they created it, right? But here's the thing. Any code of conduct that's out there, absolutely any of them, will be twisted and manipulated if individuals are given the opportunity to use it and to manipulate it in a bureaucratic way. So if you, for example, have a series of moderators that are given the ability, or a code of conduct board that are given the ability to ban people or silence people or censor people or suspend people because of a code of conduct, they will find some way to do that. For example, item number 13 of the SQLite code of conduct says love fasting. Okay. They will find some way to make a person banned because of that, right? That's how this works. The whole purpose is to weaponize the code of conduct. And so when I see people speaking out about this, like Uncle Bob, I got to agree with them. The code of conduct movement, the pushing for the code of conduct, was a Trojan horse. Once you get a code of conduct in place, well, what's the point of having a code of conduct if you don't have individuals to oversee it or to enforce it? So, by natural extension, if your organization's big enough, you have a code of conduct board or a conduct board or a moderation board with some level of power. Well, in order to make that stick, that board needs to be able to enforce their rulings, right? Which means kicking people out, banning people, etc. Once you've got a group of people who love the code of conduct, and a code of conduct that has at least some wishy-washy language in it, or overly extreme language in it, it's going to get misused. It's going to be used as a weapon, as a blunt object to beat the people who stand in the way of power, who stand for the wrong kind of politics, who are just generally not liked by those on that code of conduct oversight board. And this is what we see happening right now with Linux, with Godot, with various projects out there, with Python, with C++, and on and on and on. So how do we resolve the problem? We can point to the problem and say, that's it right there. Well, we resolve that problem by removing the code of conduct entirely. No more code of conduct. None. Gone. Get rid of the code of conduct and get rid of the groups that go with it. The code of conduct oversight boards and committees, get rid of them. Out. On their keister. Gone. No more code of conduct. Does that solve the problem entirely? No, because there's still individuals within organizations that are attempting to find ways to silence and harm other people. I mean, this is an ongoing problem throughout all of the tech world. I mean, look at some of the largest tech organizations out there. Look at Red Hat and IBM vilifying people based on the color of their skin. Look at Mozilla declaring that they're going to want to do more than deplatforming of anyone who is essentially centrist or right of center, right? We see this almost every day. There's new stories of people within any part of the tech industry, particularly in softwares where I notice it because that's where I live, that are attempting to silence people, attempting to remove groups that they don't like, right? Centrists or right-leaning people is usually where it gets focused, where that focus is. You got to get rid of those people, right? That seems to be what's happening. And so if we remove the code of conduct, and we remove the code of conduct boards that exist and the similar type organizations and teams within these groups, that removes a huge portion of their power to silence people. If, for example, there were no codes of conduct and no code of conduct oversight boards and no moderation teams that act as code of conduct oversight boards, many of the problems that we have seen would not have been problems. For example, the Linux developer banned because he didn't apologize enough. The Bcachefs developer, that wouldn't have likely happened. The Python contributor banned for liking Saturday Night Live in the 70s. That wouldn't have been a problem. The C++ developer contributor that was banned from the standards organization from using the word question. The NixOS purge where they kicked out the founder of the project. That would not have happened. And you can go on and on and on. And I think it's past time that we take a firm stance and say, you know what, no more codes of conduct. No more codes of conduct. If there is value to codes of conduct, whatever that value is vastly overshadowed by the immense, extreme, and obvious harm that they have done, that these people have done by weaponizing it. So it's time for them to just simply go. Not modified, go. Deleted. We have no code of conduct. People just, be good people or something. No code of conduct. Just, we'll do it like we did in the old days, back when, we were reasonable people. Thank you, by the way, to the Lunduke Journal subscribers over at lunduke.com. There's all the links there for the podcasts and the videos and the articles and the comics and where you can subscribe and how you can keep me free from all big tech influence and free from advertising. It's all there at lunduke.com. It's fantastic. Thank you to everyone who keeps the lights on here. I could not do this without you. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.